Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ME Construction News' second Expert Voice webinar. I hope you're all safe and well. My name is Jason Saundalkar, and I'm the editor of Middle East Consultant magazine. During this webinar, we'll be discussing the impact of COVID-19 on construction projects, FIDIC contracts, and what they outline as force majeure events, as well as claims and disputes. We'll also be discussing what the industry may look to in terms of technology to ensure that people remain safe, projects stay on track, and margins are maintained. Philip Cronin, head of claims at Omnium Resolve, will be discussing these super interesting topics with me over the next 45 minutes, following which we'll then look into some questions from the audience. Philip has over a decade of experience and has worked in consulting and contracting firms across several markets, including those of the UAE, Qatar, Oman, and Ireland. Philip, on behalf of the team at CPI Trade Media, I'd like to welcome you to this Expert Voice webinar and say thank you for taking time off your busy schedule to speak to us and our viewers. How have you been?
Hi, Jason. So thanks very much for the kind introduction.
Pleasure. It's great to have you.
I'm doing okay. Hopefully the internet doesn't start.
So you dropped out a little bit over there, but let's
typically now. I think hopefully we're back on track.
Yeah, it's typical when you kind of depend on technology to kind of come through, but you always have these glitches. But regardless, I think we've got some super interesting topics to get through. Obviously, what has happened with the pandemic is something that a lot of people have never experienced before. Certainly in this part of the world, I think it's a very, very new sort of reality in terms of delivering construction projects while having to practice social distancing and abiding by government regulations in terms of safety, on-site health and safety, etc. So from your perspective, I just wanted to kind of get your views on what the pandemic has had, the impact the pandemic has had on the industry so far.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jason. Obviously, for every industry out there, there's been an impact. Of course, we're seeing in the construction industry and on live projects that there are certain difficulties that everyone is facing from the employer and the contractor's perspective. Now, as we've seen in the last month or so, that we're coming out of the lockdown and the more difficult period, we should hopefully see that contractors and employers can get back on track in a positive manner and that projects can resume. Albeit there may be slightly different working circumstances, but hopefully that we can get back on track and projects can get back to the place where they were, or at least going in the same trajectory they were prior to the pandemic starting.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that I think the UAE has really taken the lead in terms of showing the world how to deal with this, because they've done some really interesting stuff, and I think we're one of the first countries to start releasing a lot of these lockdowns. But we also, in the industry, it was deemed very early on that construction is a vital industry to the economy. So work was allowed to kind of continue on site and in offices. So you've had work slowed down, but I don't think it ever stopped completely, as far as my understanding is.
Yeah, and I suppose that's key sorry.
No, go ahead.
That's a key as we kind of progress with our conversation in terms of the UAE identifying that construction was a key sector, and contractors really need to be aware of that going forward, that their work can resume, albeit it may be altered in some areas, but they can still progress with the works.
Yeah, that's quite, I mean, the focus of this discussion. I think one of the most important elements that a lot of people are probably thinking about right now is the contracts that govern these projects that people look to for guidance and for, when there are issues. Now, my understanding is that the FIDIC contracts are widely used across the GCC. So I'd love to hear from you in terms of, what is outlined in these contracts as a force majeure events. Are pandemics covered as part of that? And if that's not actually covered, what do companies what can companies kind of do if the contracts don't cover this particular aspect?
Yeah, a majority of the contracts, I would think, or in construction at least, are probably governed by the FIDIC suite of documents. And as at present, most projects might still be using the 99 edition. Some probably have moved on to the 2017 edition, excuse me. But there's quite a large number of similarities across the suite in terms of when we talk about force majeure. In 2009, it was force majeure. In 2017, it's slightly changed, but it's called exceptional event or circumstances. Now, pandemic itself, there's in the FIDIC suite, there's no reference to pandemic. But under the force majeure, we're looking at acts which were beyond the party's control or could never have been reasonably, or could not have been reasonably avoided or overcome. Or there was no knowledge of this event occurring prior to signing the contract. And they're, of course, key to trying to resolve any issues if the contractor believes that it's suffered a force majeure event, or if they believe that the COVID-19 is a force majeure event on their works. Now, there's a lot of nuances as you move through a contractor's claim, but we actually saw immediately once this was identified as a pandemic by the WHO, and when there was the lockdown put in place by the UE government, that contractors immediately started submitting claims based on force majeure. The big thing for a contractor needs to be aware of that: has there actually been any impact on the works as a result of this event, or is this event which has caused critical delay or disruption to the works? And that's really very key for any party, whether employer or contractor, to be aware of. It's not as simple as someone saying, okay, we have a global pandemic, but which we consider to be a force majeure event. However, has it actually impacted the works? As we said initially, that in the UAE, the construction sector was identified as a key working sector, and therefore they were allowed to continue with work, albeit in changed working circumstances and with social distancing rules brought in place, but it was never a full-on stop to the contractor. I suppose as a pandemic, yes, this event was out of people's control. Now, we've seen in certain circumstances over the last couple of months that certain employers have identified, well, we now know about this event, so we need to work around it and need to work towards coming out of this, albeit we're impacted. How we now know about the event, it's no longer a force majeure event, and now we need to just continue, as this is the new norm, as has become a hot phrase. But for a contractor, they need to really understand if the event actually impacted their works critically. They may have been disrupted due to reduction in labor on site or inability to procure certain materials, but we're not actually going to know the full effects of this as an event until maybe now, from what we've seen in terms of March to now, but especially as we continue out throughout the year, we're going to see the impact of this develop further and further.
Okay. And, if you take out COVID-19 from the picture, in your experience, what has been the main driver behind issues relating to contracts and, when it comes to people filing claims and getting into disputes?
Yeah, I suppose no project is ever the same, and everyone always has the disputes in some way or another. As a whole, you see delayed in engineering as a major impact over here, or revised engineering can severely impact the contractor. That's probably a big one, especially for the Middle East, because projects are on a grand scale and we see major changes to them, which are obviously improving the project, but can have negative effects on the project progress as well, or how the contractor initially entailed to undertake the works, and now has moved on from that and is working in a different manner of sorts. But yeah, COVID-19 is obviously an event now. There's rafts of changes in every project that can cause delay to the works, from access to engineering, late issue drawings, etc., and just general change. Yeah.
And going back to FIDIC contracts, so you had mentioned, and I think even in my own research, I found that the contracts are pretty widely used in projects across the GCC countries and even beyond that. What is the alternative to these contracts? What is something that companies can look towards that gives them a little bit more flexibility and gives them the power to do things properly when it comes to situations like this or even otherwise?
Yeah, I suppose, even under the FIDIC, I suppose to address it further, there are still opportunities for the contractor to look, or even the employer to look at means of resolving issues. Under the FIDIC suite, you've changed in legislation and employers' risks, which could also give rise to entitlement to a claim. As you're saying, moving out of the FIDIC suite, and obviously in the UK, you have NEC as well. But out here, we generally see a lot of bespoke contracts, and they can be based on the FIDIC suite, but then amended to suit the employer's needs. Now, yeah, we have seen, and you would see a lot in the EPC contracts in the Middle East, that they will generally be a bespoke contract to suit the works ongoing. For example, if you were to work in probably an EPC contract in Iraq or a state as such, you may not have a force majeure clause, which includes for war and hostilities, because there is a good probable chance that there could be a war or hostility that impacts the works. Here in the UAE, we're probably not susceptible to that, but you could always include for a pandemic clause as such, and we may see that moving forward, especially in the bespoke contracts, which it also gives the employers the flexibility and the contractor I suppose understanding that this new clause can be added quite easily in a new project, whereas for the FIDIC suite, it's quite rigid and it's fixed to what's the last amendment has been in 2017.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing where you have this bit of flexibility, because I think, if you look at the market for the last few years, I think a lot of projects for sure have gone ahead as they were from the start, but a lot of them have also been changed, have been modified just to suit developer needs, to suit market needs and everything. And bespoke contracts, by the sounds of it, gives you that flexibility to put something in where everyone kind of wins in a way. What's the kind of mindset that you're seeing? Are people open to adopting bespoke contracts, or is it still, I guess FIDIC contracts are almost something of a legacy thing that everyone has been using for years and years and years? Are people kind of more looking into bespoke contracts now, given what's going on, plus the fact that projects are somewhat dynamic now?
Yeah, I think obviously we're quite a big advocate of bespoke contract in Omnium. We have used some across over the past number of years in the UAE and actually developed our own suite as well. It's obviously a point in time when the contractor is awarded a contract and has to then sign it, then that's where some sticking points can come. Now, a contract is there to protect both parties. So a bespoke contract, it doesn't matter whether it's FIDIC amendment, or a completely different contract. There should be, an aim to the contract. And yeah, often sometimes you'll see a contractor or employer may not be satisfied with certain elements of the contract, and it may get amended throughout the tender process or the post-award process. That happens. It's actually quite easier to do that if you have a bespoke contract and understand the mechanisms throughout, rather than trying to have to go back and amend a FIDIC contract, which can be linked to clauses throughout. Having a bespoke contract, which is developed, you can actually have a better understanding and a better management to change it.
Okay. And so in terms of, you had mentioned earlier that you guys advocate for bespoke contracts. Have you done workshops with contractors, consultants, just bringing everyone up to speed in terms of the benefits that these things can bring to projects and to their own interests?
I don't believe we have. I might be wrong in that, but it's definitely something that we might be interested in moving forward for sure. Obviously, having both parties on the same page is better than having parties in a different direction. Whether it's bespoke or not, actually the management of the contract by both parties as the contract is being undertaken is actually the key thing to making any contract work.
Yeah. And I think based on, given that collaboration is quite an important piece of construction projects in any case, but even with this, with the contracts and all that, is it fair to say that, these, when you look at bespoke, there's potential to kind of increase engagement with stakeholders much early on, just right from the start, even beyond, even before design, I should say, just so everyone is on the same page and understands elements, right from the start?
Yeah, that could be an absolute possibility. We shouldn't think that it couldn't be. Definitely, anyone in the tender process is given an advanced copy of the contract and should be free to review it and assess it. Then obviously, as you said, it opens the table early for people to understand what's included within the contract and how it differs to what they might be used to in terms of a FIDIC. They can raise any queries, and there's a collaborative approach to actually signing it and applying the contract.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think from here, I'd like to move on to, we touched on this a little bit earlier. You had mentioned, we were talking about claims and disputes. And you saw a lot of, right at the start of this thing, I think you said you started seeing these things coming in from contractors and all that. Could you share some insights in terms of, what are the key drivers behind claims and disputes in the region?
Obviously, delay to the project is the key one. For a contractor, it's really they need to identify what the cause of delay was. Every project that is delayed, each party believes, or generally, not always, but most of the time, one party believes that they're in the right over the other party. We often see a conflict in this instance. But delay to any project is the key driver. Okay, you might see some contractors claim disruption and acceleration claims as well. But generally, the projects over here will be delayed due to certain issues. Now, as we speak to from a contractor or to a contractor, you would be asking the contractor to demonstrate the delay event, the cause of the delay event, and the impact of the event. And a contractor should be able to identify that the event was critical and it wasn't due to them. They should be able to identify that it was either due to the employer for whatever reason, and should put together a solid argument. Now, obviously a contractor should always identify the event in accordance with the contract at the earliest opportunity. And keep on top of this, and then monitor the event to see if it keeps causing a delay or if they've managed to mitigate against further delays, get the project back on track, or if there's a considerable attributable delay to that event. Once following the contract and complying with the contract, once they do that, they should obviously compile all the contemporaneous records and the particulars in relation to that event and submit it to the employer for review.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. And just in terms of, if you think about the supply chain, because I know in the GCC countries with the projects that we have here, there's a lot of dependence on international supply chains. There's a lot of materials that come from Europe, I think from the Far East and everything. Would delays in that, can that be managed in terms of the contractors so that the projects aren't delayed too much, or was that, again, part of the reason that they were filing these claims in the first place?
Yeah, there's train of thought. Obviously, some can manage certain elements of supply chain wherever it's coming, or long lead items, and then some elements may just ultimately just impact the works and cause delay anyway. Obviously, advice to contractors, probably from the employer at the outset of the project, is to commence the procurement of the long lead items at the earliest possible opportunity. And obviously, if there's approval process, etc., gain the approval. Now, there is delays, of course, to supply chain, and supply chain issues happen in every industry. How can a contractor manage that? Obviously, to look at what's delayed and commence working on other elements of the project. Look at other elements which are arriving earlier than the delayed materials, and try and mitigate against the delay which is going to be caused by the delayed item. That's really the only advice that can be offered to a contractor in terms of an element which may be causing critical delay to a project. You know, if you have a 40-story tower block you're building and the steel is delayed, you're obviously going to be impacted greatly by that. Now, a contractor may look for an alternative supplier, which may be able to bring it quicker to the project. Now, there's obviously a further approval process. The contractor has to identify if that approval process will actually shorten the overall receipt of materials, or waiting for the original planned material. Will that actually be better?
Okay. And so, say we get to the stage where contractor has decided that a claim must be filed. What's the kind of groundwork that they need to do? And you'd mentioned some of it earlier, but if you want to be very concise in terms of what they have to really pay attention to in terms of submitting a valid claim, so that it's processed and a resolution can be found.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, comply with what the contract says. So, if you're submitting a claim under FIDIC 20.1, and then what the cause of that event is under 8.4, you really need to look at the cause of the events, identify that there was a delay. Now, notify the employer is obviously. Identifying the delay is obviously the first thing you need to do. Understand the cause of the delay and the effect it has had on works. Then immediately after, notify the employer of the said delay as well. Compiling records to demonstrate that the contractor has done everything in its power to mitigate against the delay. Now, obviously, that's within reason. Another thing that we always discuss with the contractors when either preparing or assessing claims is to really compile good records. There's some excellent contractors in the region that, once they're aware of an event that's impacting the works, they're not necessarily looking for an extension of time immediately, but they will have identified to the employer, look, this is a potential to cause serious delay, and they will generate the records that actually support that. They will write letters and notify the employer, and they have just general good record keeping. After that, it makes preparing a claim much easier, and also from an employer's perspective, it actually makes it much easier to assess and to identify, okay, there is true entitlement here. Obviously, a contractor, or not all, but some contractors want to try and maximize its position, and as a claims consultant, that's what we have always tried to do for both contractors and employers. But if a contractor really has good record keeping, it identifies the true delay to the works. There's very little recourse from the employer's point of view if it's an actual valid claim.
Yeah, and speaking of this on the same topic is, given what's going on and all, I guess it's fair to say that some parties might almost look at the situation as a way to kind of hide poor performance maybe on a project and file claims based on that, trying to link it to COVID-19 or supply chain breakdown. Have you seen many of those?
Yeah, not yet. Now, they may become apparent over the coming months, as people, as I said earlier, that there may be impacts from the pandemic itself affecting the works. But as I said, there were a number of claims we received in the first week or two of the lockdown, which already identified that there was delays to the works because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some contractors may use this as a way to hide previous delays that they were actually experienced on site, and maybe their own fault, non-excusable delays, which will be contractor delays. We're for sure going to see a lot more claims which may try and paper over contract claims. And we try and advise a contractor, look, if you have your own delay, it's better to identify it and notify the employer of it if you're submitting an extension of time, because it's very easy to identify once a claim is being assessed that, okay, there's actually a contractor and an employer delay, whether they're overlapping or not. And it's quite easy to identify in the long run.
And you had spoken like a little bit earlier about record keeping. Right now, I guess there's a big focus on going digital, and right now there's digital paper trails, so to speak, everywhere. Has this kind of helped with record keeping and with shortening the times that it goes from submitting a claim to being resolved?
It can be. I suppose the software that we use is only as good as the person using it, and we find that often if going to look at records, especially on an electronic system, ACANX or something similar, it's whoever's using it can be very quick at identifying where the documents lie. But for a new user to come in, there's a bit of learning time there, and coming up to speed with it. But definitely, of course, to find it all in one place on a system like ACANX it can be quite useful. And as we're moving into a more digital age, we've seen, as we're all working from home, that the VPN to the office server is just, everyone needs it, and it's a key tool now for us. And that this will continue, and projects will develop further in terms of working from home kind of methodology, which will be really interesting to see how this is done.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a big deal now for the construction industries. I think digital workflows, digital record keeping, and just in general embracing new technology. Unfortunately, the industry, from what I've seen, is quite fixated in terms of doing things the old-fashioned way. Sometimes they're very attached to tools of the past, methodologies of the past, and my hope is that given what's going on and given that everyone has had to adapt to this new reality, there's be more of a mindset for accepting change now, just because you have to do it to keep your projects on track, make sure people are safe. So I'm just wondering, when do you think we'll, I don't know, first of all, if you agree with that kind of what I just mentioned. Is there like a mindset of accepting change now a little bit more visible in the industry?
I think I know where your question is going, but I think this change that you're looking to see or hoping to see, I think it might take a little bit longer. We're seeing gradual changes in the last couple of months in terms of working from home and how this is managed, etc. But I haven't seen anything yet of an immediate, this is how we're going to work moving forward, especially from a remote way. But you look at things like BIM, etc., that have been coming on the market in the last 5 to 10 years. They're definitely huge changes to the way we can work. It's just a matter of getting buy-in from the industry and everyone using it, really. We're really keen on trying to use BIM moving forward in terms of assessing delay and trying to demonstrate delay events in another manner. Nothing, no slight on how we have done it over the last 20 to 30 years in terms of, you look at a program and you try and identify the delay here, but more visuals can be really extremely helpful to identifying this is why it was delayed, and to demonstrate through a BIM model the continuous delay or the impacts that the delay has had on the works, on certain elements of the works at least.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing is, right now there's a lot of talk around data-rich BIM models, which kind of plug into every aspect of the construction process. So even when it comes down to the design phase to the delivery phase, and even post handover when you're looking at facilities management, people can in theory use that model to run the building and or the project for for the future. And I think there's a lot of focus right now on manufacturers, for example, making sure their products fit into certain BIM models. So you can literally have all the information about the product. You just need to click and you can find out about it. I think that's the kind of stuff where we'll start seeing the real efficiencies maybe coming out in construction projects, both in terms of design, because right now I think it's pretty widely said that there's a bit of a disconnect between what designers kind of do and what's actually possible.
I just lost you at the end there, Jason, I think. But I think in terms of, you're talking about the future of construction. 15 years ago, doing my degree, there was a huge emphasis on pod construction or off-site construction, which we have seen. And I know Sean McHugh from ALEC last week is a big advocate and spoke highly of it last week. And really, again, I think in the coming years, as a result of the pandemic, we're going to see not our hand forced at alternative methods, but it's something that we should be pushing forward in terms of an industry to be more sustainable, to be quicker at how we do build and how we do business. Because of course, the new methods of construction, if we could get them on a larger scale, they're obviously could be more efficient and less risky, and we actually might be able to do more in terms of construction. Burj Khalifa, you could see that double. Maybe not 10 years, but in 20 years' time, that if construction can really develop its methodology of construction, there shouldn't be. Obviously, there is a limit, but we should be able to go beyond the limits of possibility at the moment.
Yeah, and I think I've done a bit of research. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening between robotics, and in Europe, I think they're using industrial 3D printing to do bridges and to do even in Dubai we have our own success story with the Museum of the Future. The offices that were 3D printed. So I think you're going to start seeing more and more of these methodologies and these technologies kind of getting into the market. And my kind of dream scenario is the point where you've got a model on a computer somewhere back in the office, and it's connected, over the internet or something to a robot that's literally doing as much as possible on its own. And then you have, the workers come and just do the stuff that the robot can't actually do. I don't know, that seems like a reality that is a few years down the line, no doubt, but I think it is very possible given what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You see smaller scales of these small projects, someone building a house or a room using 3D printing concrete and stuff like this, and it really is fascinating. I think we just need to break the mold of the traditional construction methods and get someone, or someone needs to just take a big enough project and take not a risk, but do the engineering, make sure it's safe, and someone, as you said, the Museum of Technology here, it is an amazing building, and what they've done there is pretty spectacular. We've seen it in the UAE, and maybe it's just a matter that when some of the projects here are so unique, maybe it's not as easy to say, okay, let's just do some pod or offsite construction. But we see on the Bike Creek or on the canal that the villas, they were built offsite and then brought here. So it is being done. It's just we just need to see it on a larger scale, and especially now when we need to move away from on-site construction and look at the off-site fabrication of elements.
Yeah, and are you seeing, like, within the local market, if you look at GCC, countries, are you seeing more of a kind of emphasis on terms of developing expertise for, doing like 3D printing, for example? Because I know a lot of, like, you mentioned just now with the villas, I think the project, they were developed overseas and then shipped over here. But is there kind of a move towards bringing that expertise into the region, where things are done locally? I think purely from a sustainability standpoint, where materials or entire villas, in this case, have to travel less, will have quite a positive impact.
Yeah, I think, of course, we're seeing more items being procured locally as well, and that's generally probably a cost driver more so. But now it's become the need that we need to produce locally and procure locally. Previously, it wasn't a requirement, and people or employers specifications wanted elements from Europe or Middle East or America, etc. In their project. However, I think we have seen over the last 10 years, that with the steel companies expanding here, MEP companies expanding here to actually produce elements, and we have seen this over the last 10, 15 years, and probably a cost driver of a necessity out of the last recession. We're obviously going to see that moving forward as well now when people actually diversify into different methods of construction. As I said, we may see hotels here being built with the pods built off-site, but in the actual region. It will be a huge positive.
Yeah, no, and I'm quite looking forward to that because I think there is some really interesting stuff happening, and if anywhere, the kind of the scale of the projects here, as well as the projects themselves, the designs, some of the stuff you see here, are things that you'd never see anywhere else in the world. It's there's that mindset that you can still build dream projects in the region. Just if you look at Saudi, if you look at the UAE, these markets. Yeah,
I'm a huge fan of the pod construction for the houses, and my wife isn't. So there you go. There's just a small not a small mindset, but a traditional mindset of a concrete built home, as opposed to the new trend of actually the container built homes, where you can see that there's amazing architectural feats of these container built houses, and it's quite a simple process of actually refurbishing and building, as opposed to the old method of construction, which is just concrete built or timber or block. But yeah, it's just convincing one person at a time. And Jason, you'll have to start doing that, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, funny enough, the other day I was even looking into material sciences out here. There's some interesting things being done in terms of, there are certain bricks now that absorb pollution. There's some really interesting materials out there that will not only let you design completely different, shapes and projects and all that, because there's still a limitation in terms of materials connecting to what a project can actually look like. But again, and that factoring that in with 3D printing, there seems to be a lot of possibilities down the line. When the material science gets there, I think that's when maybe 3D printing, for example, will take off.
Sure, of course, yeah, absolutely. And as you said, cool. It's just a matter of getting someone to take the risk.
Yeah, and I think like we said right at the start of this, I think this is the time when people will start looking at new ways of doing things. Just purely one for the safety aspect of it, but also just with the new technology in place, you can keep building projects day and night. I mean, I'm sure some people who live close to those projects might not enjoy it, but you could, in theory, do that.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Philip, it's fantastic talking to you. I'd like to open up the floor now to questions from the audience. Here, I'd just like to remind everyone that's watching and submitting questions, please keep them a bit short so we can kind of fit them into the white box that you see at the bottom of the screen there. We'll just wait for them to come up, and I'll just read them out to you.
No problem.
Okay, so first question, are courts, governments showing empathy towards claims from contractors at the moment?
Oh, I've not seen any claims at the moment. I presume the question is in relation to the COVID-19 issue, and our courts, governments showing empathy in relation to the claims surrounding that. But we haven't seen any claims as a result of that go to court yet, or not that I've seen anyway. But under the UAE law, there is the element of good faith, etc. So if there is empathy, it'll be based on a legal aspect as a result of good faith between the parties, the contractor and the employer.
Okay. Can we pull up another question? Okay, so how can we get clients to resolve claims more efficiently?
Yeah, I think we may have touched on it slightly in the earlier part of the discussion, Jason. But for this viewer, for a contractor to prepare the best claim, obviously comply with what the contract says itself, and notify the employer at the earliest opportunity, good record keeping, identify the cause of the events and the impact which has had on the works, and identify that and demonstrate it to the employer, in an efficient and concise manner. And furthermore, if you have your own delay events which you've caused, identify those as well. Obviously, there's concurrent delay, which is a huge contentious element in any project, but identifying this at the outset takes a lot of ambiguity away from the employer's point of view. Now, you can discuss this at length, but try and get the claim in early and keep identifying the issues revolving from the claim, and try and discuss with the employer. But obviously, if you develop a good relationship at the earliest point in the project, and you can continue that by complying with what the contract says and administering what the contract says, then a claim should, in theory, be dealt with quite easily.
Okay, sounds good. Let's pull up another question. Okay, so do you think that bespoke contracts will become the norm going forward?
I'm not quite sure if they become the norm, but I think a lot of projects will start to use them. They have been not favored out here, but there has been a lot of the FIDICs which have been amended into a more bespoke context. We'd like to see them becoming, more popular, yes, of course, but they might not be the first port of call for an employer to go to. It depends on the advice it receives from its parties and what the outset of, or what the outcome of the project is going to be. It's very hard to build certain projects with a standard form of contract. So it really depends on what type of project you're going to build, and everything that, all the makeup of that contract itself needs to be to ensure that the project is built in accordance with the contract price, and the contract duration, to ensure that both parties can carry that out.
Yeah, makes sense. Sounds good. Okay, so here's one more. Will digital contracts become an acceptable form of agreement?
I suppose we're living in a much more digitized, way of life. So maybe not in the near future, but I would think, as we progress in life, in our lifetime, we'll probably see this happen. As someone 10 years ago, they probably would have said no, but as current circumstances and how we're living in a digital world, progressing and ever evolving, it probably will become an acceptable form of agreement. But it'll be maybe not in the 5 to 10 years, but down the line for sure. Yeah,
sounds good. One more. Okay, so how do we tackle delays caused by authorities?
I presume maybe geared towards, again, the current circumstances in terms of the lockdown, etc. It obviously depends what the contract says. On the FIDIC, if it's an authority delay and there's recourse there, identifying what the delay was, and notify the employer under the contract what provision gives rise to the claim, and that's really what it stands with. Authorities is quite a loose word there. Would probably have to be government, etc. And obviously it depends what the contract says, or the contract which you're dealing with. I'm free, obviously, Jason, as well. If any of the listeners want to forward these or have a further discussion on this, we'd be more than happy to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Any questions that we can't tackle here, I'll put up my email address in a second, but jason.s@cpitrademedia.com. If anyone has any questions that we can't address here, I'll forward them on to you, and then you can address them directly that way. Well, we have one more question that's just come up here.
Further add the discussion,
Yeah. So we've got one more. Do the delay aspects in contracts align with more developed markets?
I suppose that's in terms of, as we're talking about bespoke contracts, does the actual FIDIC suite or pre-prepared contract actually align with the delays that we're actually encompassing now? Potentially not. Each delay is different. There's a set of impacts listed within the FIDIC suite, which can be cause a delay, but out with that, you're quite limited. Bespoke contracts, you could obviously add in more or amend the FIDIC suite to add in other delay aspects, but you're quite limited to what's there. So I suppose for that viewer itself, if you've seen other delay events which aren't listed in the contract, you're probably going to feel that they probably don't actually work for the developed market. But again, depends on project, etc. But there's clearly we suffer different delays now than what we would have in 50 years ago, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of things that have changed just in terms of the markets, the way things are done. Okay, perfect. Well, Philip, thanks a lot for your time. That was a fantastic discussion. I enjoyed having a chat with you and learning a little about this myself. And I hope the insights we provided were useful for everyone that was watching. So to everyone else, I'd like to say thanks for your time. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason.